Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Kat Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I am very happy to welcome Samina Ali as we celebrate celebrating the release of her book, Pieces You'll Never Get Back, a memoir of unlikely survival. Let's give one more hand for Samina. Wonderful. Samina is joined tonight by fellow author Kathryn Ma. Let's give a hand for Kathryn as well. This is so exciting. Thank you for making a full house tonight and for showing up for literature and good literature and making it so comfortable and like really warm and full of love. So thank you so kindly. If you're looking for additional seating, these purple stairs right here, you are welcome to sit on. Please do. And everyone found a seat, which is really great. Thank you so much for the most part. I have very brief business, and then I will let these two take over. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I didn't ask, is picture taking okay? How do you feel about picture taking? Absolutely. Picture taking is okay, but only good pictures. No bad pictures allowed. Don't tag people in bad pictures. But please don't take a call in the middle of the event, is the real goal in that piece of business. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. And we have copies of books by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. And this is a unique opportunity to have your book signed and potentially personalized. So take advantage of that opportunity. It's a great idea. And if you already have a copy, you have someone in your life who wants the book. I guarantee it. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Kathryn Ma is the author of the widely praised novel, The Year She Left Us, and the short story collection, All That Work and Still No Boys, which won the Iowa Short Fiction Award. She is a recipient of the David Nathan Meyerson Prize for Fiction and has twice been named a San Francisco Public Library laureate. Her latest novel, The Chinese Groove, was the 2024 selection for the One City, One Book by the San Francisco Public Library. I know, it's so exciting. Please give one more hand for Kathryn Ma. And last but certainly not least, Samina Ali is the author of Mattress on Rainy Days, which won the French Prix Premier Roman Étranger Award and was a finalist for the Penn Hemingway Award in Fiction. She's also a recipient of a Lana Draft Foundation Writers Award. She's a public speaker, and her TEDx talk, What the Quran Really Says About the Hijab, currently has over 8 million views. She's viral. Her writing has been featured in various outlets, from national NPR to The Economist, and her memoir, Pieces You'll Never Get Back, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Samina Ali.
Thank you, Car. Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Here we are together. It's wonderful to be here. I'm very honored to be in conversation with Samina, and I'm so appreciative that you're here to celebrate the launch of this wonderful book and to listen to Samina tell us her story in writing it. I want to tell you a little bit about all the wonderful reception this book is getting and congratulate Samina. The book was featured on the cover of the Washington Post Book World recently, and there was a feature article on Samina and the book in the San Francisco Chronicle. It was named a Book of the Month by the LA Times, Ms. Magazine, Alta Journal, and a number of other outlets. And it's been chosen for a celebrity book club, which we cannot say yet, but which will soon be announced. So I am very, very happy for you, Samina, and it's well deserved.
Thank you.
As I wrote to Samina after reading it, I really was so moved by this memoir not only because it's the story of resilience, recovery, and healing after a terrible injury, but also because of the complex way in which she interweaves family history, culture, consideration of faith, ancient storytelling with this medical tale. And so it is a memory piece. It is the story of a writer's journey. It's a very personal story, but it enlarges, it expands to include so much more than just one person's story, although that story, of course, also is very inspiring. So I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. We're going to talk for a little bit. Then along the way, Samina will give us a short reading. We'll have a few more questions from me, and then we will open it up. And I hope you'll be thinking about questions that you'd like to ask her as well. So, Samina, as Carr just mentioned, the first book you wrote after your long road to recovery began was your novel, Madras on Rainy Days. And in this book, early on, you tell us that the act of writing that novel saved your life. So I would love for you to tell us why you wrote this book, what the origins of this particular story are.
Well, I want to begin by thanking Green Apple for hosting this event tonight, and for all of you. Thank you all so much for coming out from all over the Bay Area. It means so much to me, and to see so many faces from my past and in my present is just wonderful. This is a wonderful, wonderful way to launch this, so thank you. So the reason I began this is my daughter, who's sitting here. She's Zara, and the book actually ends with her birth. The reason I began it is because I had stopped writing for many, many years. The reason my book came out, my novel came out over 20 years ago, is because the process of writing that book was so difficult because I wrote it through brain damage. And I wrote that book at a time when the neurologist said, "You're never going to write again." And I still remember his gestures. He said, to write, you need this part of your brain and this part of your brain and this part of your brain and this part of your brain. And he said, there is no part of your brain that's not damaged. You have global trauma to your brain. And I remember leaving that and thinking, oh my God, I had two thoughts. First, I thought, throughout my pregnancy, I had said, there's something wrong with my pregnancy. There's something wrong. There's something wrong. And they kept dismissing me and kept saying, you're 29, you're healthy, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. And then during the delivery, I also kept saying, why am I experiencing more pain up in my head and in my chest than I am down there where I'm giving birth? I should actually be having more pain down there. And they kept saying, no, you're fine, you're fine. But it was 20 minutes after I delivered my son that I had a grand mal seizure, and it cut off oxygen to my brain for 30 seconds. And that's when they said, oh, maybe there is something wrong. And so they finally wheeled me in, and they saw that the chest pain I'd been complaining about and that they'd given me Alka-Seltzer for was a heart attack. And the head pain was because I was already having a lot of strokes during the delivery. Yeah. And I had liver failure, kidney failure, pulmonary edema, my blood stopped clotting. It was multiple organ failure. At that point, they thought I would just die, and they told my family, if she's lucky, she'll die. Because if she's not, then she's going to be a vegetable. So from the beginning, they kept saying, this isn't possible, this isn't possible. And then I came back. And then when I left that appointment 8 weeks after I had delivered my son, and they said, you're never going to write because you have massive, massive trauma to your brain. And my brain was expanded to the point where it was touching the inside of my skull. Mm-hmm. And they said it would take more than a year for it to get back down to normal size. And I left there thinking, I've been telling them, I told them throughout that there was something wrong, and they didn't believe me. Why should I believe them now? Mm. So that's what I did. And I went home, and of course I was brain damaged. So I'm sure it was faulty thinking. But also I was just frightened.
I'd lost so much, and I just couldn't imagine also losing my writing. So I would sit at the desk, and in the beginning it was about 5 minutes, and then I would have to literally turn and fall to the ground because my head was in so much pain. And the pain is because you are creating your new neural pathways, and it's a repetition, a repetition, a repetition. So after that, I stopped writing because every time I imagined writing a book, every time I imagined my novel, all I could see was swirling in my office desk chair and falling to the ground. And so when I got pregnant with my daughter, I thought, oh my God. So I went back to the same hospital where I delivered my son and said, you have my medical file. Let's make sure you get it right this time. And they said, last time you were 29 and you didn't have anything wrong with you, and that contributed to you being healthy and recovering. This time, if anything happens, we don't think you're going to make it. So that's why I started to write, because at first I wrote the story in a journal just to record it for my son, because I didn't know if I was going to make it.
Mm. It's such a harrowing story, and I mean, I'm almost speechless at the faith that you had, not only in yourself and in your children and in your family, but also in the process of writing. And I have to say, as a fellow writer, it's very moving to me, as I said before, that we can trust the process, we can trust our inner life, and know that there is something in the work itself, right? That brings us through, that brings us to the light. But as I said, this is a story of many layers, and it's one of the fascinating things about the book. And it does much more than just tell that very gripping story. It also touches on your family history, your cultural history, the story of your faith. Parts of the book that I loved the most were the descriptions of you learning Arabic and learning how to read the Quran and learning some of the ancient stories. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how you chose to interweave that part of your life, much of it based in memory, with the very present day. I mean, I know you weren't writing it in the present, but that the medical part of the story feels so present and so dynamic. Tell us about that choice.
I knew that I wanted to, when I decided to go back and write the story, I knew that it had to be bigger than me, right? You can't write, even though it's a memoir, I'm fooling all of you. Anyone who writes a memoir is fooling you. Let's just be honest. It's not really. It's an act. I'm an actor. I'm just pretending that it's entirely about me. But it can't be. If it was entirely about me, then it would just be a diary. Right? So it has to be bigger than me. The story has to be bigger than me. It has to touch people, and it has to remind them of who they are. It can't just be about me, because then I can't invite you in. And so I think that performance of a memoir is quite an interesting genre.
Had you done a lot of reading of memoir in the past? Is it a genre that's always interested you, or was this something, just a new exploration for you?
No, this was an entirely new exploration. I read a lot of memoirs while I was writing it. I teach at Stanford. I see a lot of my students here who showed up for me from all over the Bay Area, which is so meaningful. I tell them always to have model books when they're writing, and so I had my model books next to my desk.
Some writers, me, say, I don't want to read something in the same genre while I'm writing because I'm worried that it will sort of get too far into my head and I'll get a little too influenced by it. tell me about your thinking on that. Maybe I'm just being superstitious. Or...
No, I am trained as a fiction writer and I teach fiction. So writing the memoir was, I often tell people that writing this book was as difficult as the delivery itself, because I kept, my first several drafts just kept being a novel. I kept writing scenes. I kept writing scenes and dialogue. It was a process of having to unlearn the craft of fiction and then relearn the craft of memoir, which is you have to rely on the voice and you have to tell rather than show. And so I really did have to live inside of the genre in order to write it.
Well, it's a good moment. Let me ask you this question, and maybe we can hear you read some from the book. Your neurologist tells you, as you say, the brain is fragmented. That there are neural pathways that have become disconnected, and the neurologist tells you you need to begin to try to put your brain back together again. So I'm interested in you reflecting on how that instruction to you, that encouragement, or I mean, it wasn't really an instruction, I suppose, but that possibility he was offering you of putting the brain back together, remapping those neural connections. How did that, perhaps we can think of it as a sort of metaphor, how did that inform the structure of the book? Because you do have a very particular structure to this book, which makes it even more compulsively readable than even the wonderful story itself.
So for anyone in here who's writing a memoir, it's one of the things you learn is that the structure of it comes last, which I didn't know because I was entering memoir land for the first time. So for years while I was writing it, I was very frustrated because, again, I come from a fictional background and I thought that I just could get the structure. But what ended up happening is for years I kept rewriting the draft and I kept rewriting the draft, and I have friends here who I've gone on walks with where I was literally crying, saying, it can't be told linearly. I know that, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it. Jen's nodding. Yes. And finally one day, it just occurred to me, oh my God, I have to break the narrative open. It has to mirror the brain. It has to mirror the broken brain. The structure and the narrative have to go hand in hand. They have to be the same. And as soon as I had that realization, I literally sat down and wrote the book in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
6 weeks. That's all it took. And I have to thank my husband because he would take my daughter and they would leave for the weekends and he just took over. But for 6 weeks, I did not leave the desk because it was like everything was so clamped down and suppressed, and then as soon as I had that opening, everything just burst open, and then I wrote it in 6 weeks and we sent it out.
Wow. So you'll see when you read the book that the sections are short. Some of them are only a couple sentences long. Some of them are, considerably longer than that. So that you're getting glimpses. You're getting the story told in short bursts. But it does not feel scattered, actually. It has a very dramatic through line, and you're both able to do that, fragment the structure, break open the narrative, but also keep the flow. And I think that's very tricky. So congratulations on doing that. Read something for us, please.
Let me get my glasses. This is the difference between writing a novel 20 years ago and now.
So true.
So I'm just going to read you from a couple of scenes from the beginning just to give you a sense of how short some of the chapters are, and then how some of them are a little bit longer. So chapter 1. Some part of me knew I was sick right from the start, months before the symptoms appeared. Not that the symptoms appearing changed anything. Even then, even when the signs were obvious, no one did anything to help me. Chapter 2. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle my neurologist advised me on the morning of my discharge from the hospital. Imagine how every single piece must fit together perfectly for that puzzle to make sense. That was your brain before the damage. Every piece, every neuron working in concert with other pieces, a delicate, sophisticated process. Now imagine scattering that puzzle. That's your brain now. Little disconnected pieces, little islands of neurons within each hemisphere working independently from others. Your job from this day forward is to put back together as many pieces of that puzzle as possible. So I'm going to jump ahead, and I'm going to read from a place where, so I was in a coma for 5 days, and this is the part where they're trying, because even after you wake up from a coma, you're still not quite here. So this is the part where the doctor is trying to sort of reel me in like a fish, I guess. The latest MRI scan results had just come back, and it was clear that something about them had disturbed the neurologist. He spoke slowly and intentionally, watching my face for any signs of understanding. In a healthy brain, all the pieces fit together. The connections between brain cells are called neural pathways. Those pathways keep everything running smoothly. To illustrate this, he interlaced his fingers, locking his 2 hands together. The global trauma to your brain has scattered those pieces. He pulled his hands apart and held up all 10 fingers for me to see, splayed apart. Your job from here on out is to recover as many puzzle pieces as possible to put yourself back together. I was too debilitated to understand what he was telling me, and I remember looking as intently into his face as he was mine, searching for clues from his expression. Despite the concern I detected in his voice, he kept his face emotionless, perhaps intentionally, so as not to alarm me. He must have seen my confusion because he finally patted my arm and said, "You know what? I think tomorrow might be a great day for you to meet your son." As the new nurse slipped inside the curtain carrying a needle for yet another blood draw, the neurologist told her, "Let's get Ishmael down here tomorrow. Meeting him might be the spark Mom here needs."
Thank you. So we're talking a little bit about memoir and how memoir is written, and it brings to mind a couple of things for me. One is that, the memoirist is often exploring the question, who am I? But in your case, because there was so much memory loss, and you are trying to put the jigsaw puzzle pieces back together again, and you're trying to recreate for yourself and for us, the readers, what happened, you're not only asking, who am I? You're asking, who was I?
Mm-hmm.
And that was occurring to me as I was reading the book, like, how do you go back and you try to reconstitute your life, the part of your life, the parts of your memory that are gone? Can you talk to us a little bit about how you thought about that balance between the life moving forward and also looking back and trying to recreate? Because you call the book Pieces You'll Never Get Back. And I imagine that there's some draw to just moving on, not necessarily wanting to look back, which probably is a pretty traumatic memory. But the writer in you, it seemed to me, was very determined to try to also think about this question, who was I, and how does that fit with who I am now.
I think the main difference between brain trauma and any kind of illness is that with the organ failures, it's okay. Organs can come back on. I was on life support, and after my organs failed, and they're able to come back on. But with brain damage, once the neurons are damaged, they're gone. They're dead. And so you cannot, when I say I had to relearn to be fluent in English, I had to relearn how to walk. I was doing a lot of these motor skills and a lot of these things along with my newborn. And so when we think about brain damage, I think one of the things that happens, and one of the things I noticed, is people think, she's going to come back, she's going to be the wife I knew, she's going to be the daughter I knew, she's going to be the person I knew. But when you re-engineer yourself from the root, from the very core of your brain, you naturally rise into being somebody very different. You're an entirely new person at that point. So there is no going back. And it really was a time where I had to bury my old self in order for me to rise up again. But, one of the things that I want to get across is that even though this is the main, the through line, the reason, I bring in a lot of other themes, like you were saying. I talk about how when I did suddenly start waking up 5 days later, they started calling me Miracle Girl, and I was known throughout the hospital as Miracle Girl. So what I do in the book is I take that concept of miracle and I talk about it through the Bible. What does it mean? How have we defined miracle? I talk about it through the Torah. I talk about it through the Quran. And so I'm connecting different things like that because I want to make sure that everyone understands that the thing about the brain is it takes memories, it takes experiences, it takes our life events, and what it likes to do is create a story. It creates a narrative about who we are. And oftentimes those narratives about who we are can be very negative about ourselves, right? We experience something and we're like, oh, I'm always a failure. Or, oh, nothing good ever happens to me. Or, I'm always too loud, or I'm always too, whatever it is, we create these life stories. Our brain does this. And when you go through an experience like mine and you realize how your brain can be manipulated, you realize how superficial this is, just a matter of, just the spongy part of your brain. So the whole point of the book, my hope is that people will read it and will move past these sorts of differences, especially now in this era, where we move past these differences of race, of gender, of, whatever it might be, even the differences in faith, and start seeing these commonalities among ourselves. And so that's the core message of the book, is that the idea that we have of ourselves is just a construct. It's nothing more than a construct. It's nothing more than a story. And so this is a story within a story. It's a meta story, right? The memoir is.
Yeah, it's a book so much about connections. Not only that very concrete example of making connections within the brain, but it's a book about reaching out and seeing where there are connections and commonalities between all people, all faiths, all backgrounds, and that's part of it that I think deepens the narrative, and I appreciated that so much. I do want to get back to your son though, because he is on his own medical journey. After he's born, he's in the ICU for a while, the neonatal ICU, and then you bring him home, and as you alluded to, you are both becoming new people, developing. And I just was fascinated by that idea of both of you developing. He is becoming, from a kind of scary beginning in life, he becomes a thrillingly, a thriving individual person. What was that like to both parent him while you were recovering yourself, and how do you talk about that in the book?
In the beginning, when I just woke up in the neuro ICU, I didn't even remember that I had a baby. And I didn't remember his father, my ex-husband. And so I had a lot of memory loss. But later, what ended up happening is that my mom stayed on and she helped to take care of my son because I was essentially a newborn myself. I couldn't take care of him. And during that time, I competed with my son because I didn't have an attachment. We think that as mothers, we have this idea that mothers are just so nurturing, and we just think, oh, you're a woman, you're a nurturer, you're going to be able to be this amazing mom. And because I didn't recognize him, because he wasn't what I would think of as my son, when my mom was taking care of him and I needed her, I needed my pain meds, or I needed her to help me to the bathroom, or I needed to be fed, but she was feeding him or changing his diaper, I was very much in competition. And I bring that up in the book about how at first it was a competition with him. And then eventually you learn that, the idea that we have these connections with each other, those connections come from love. But love comes from a bond, and bonds come and they arise from, feeling those connections with each other from the brain. And when I really couldn't feel any of those connections with other people, I didn't have them with him. So I had to learn to build those connections, not just with him, but with everyone around me. And so he was kind of the start of it. So he was the trunk of the tree, essentially.
I'm going to ask Samina one more question and then turn to you all. So be thinking about your questions for her. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your parents, your mother and your father. One of the things, you talk about your mother taking care of the baby and you at the same time, but she also seemed to me to understand at some very deep maternal level what you needed. And it was so difficult for you to come back to the computer and try to write again. And your mother, who of course is there to ease your suffering and help your recovery, but she tells you, go back to your desk, which was sort of a shock to me when she says that in the book. I would love to hear a little bit about how you decided to write about your parents and how you rebuilt a connection. And speaking of connections, how you rebuilt a connection with your father throughout this process.
Yeah, so one of the things that I say in the book is that my dad and I had stopped speaking when I had married my son's father, because he was outside. He wasn't Muslim. He isn't Muslim, and he's not Indian. And so my dad felt really betrayed. And so we had stopped talking. And then when they called him to say that I was in the neuro ICU and my younger brother happens to be a physician, and he was studying to be a neurosurgeon at the time, strangely. And so he called my dad and said, you need to get here.
Because the universe has an overdeveloped sense of irony.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think by the time he got there, I think he realized, what I do in the book is, memoir, of course, means that we write from our memory. So how do you write a memoir when you don't have memories, right? So what I do in the book is I bring in a lot of I ask for all my medical reports. So I have a stack of medical reports from those 5 days that I bring in. And then I interviewed the doctors. I went back to the hospital. I interviewed a lot of the doctors. And I also bring in other people's memories. And then there's, of course, imagination, because I'm a fiction writer. And so my dad to this day does not talk about the event. And he didn't want me to write about it either. And so everything I know what happened with my dad, I know from my mom. And then I invented those scenes. I wrote those as fictional scenes of him. But all of the past, everything that he had, the reasons for him stopping to talk to me, all of that just kind of fell away. It just suddenly he was like, what am I doing? This is my daughter. And so we've never since then have had an issue. And then with the other memories, what I do is I describe it just writing the book as kind of creating those neural pathways where you have to go around the dark neurons that are no longer functioning. And that's kind of what I did with the narrative is every time I bring in other narratives, I'm moving around those dark areas, the memories I simply don't have. So I have to bring in other people's memories.
You're remarkable, but also can we just give it up for the brain? The brain is remarkable. The brain is remarkable. Absolutely. I feel strong and powerful now that I know all the things that my brain can do.
Well, that's what my hope is, right? We're talking about everything that I went through. One of my hopes is that everyone reads this and we realize that, whatever we're facing, there's a concept in the book. I talk about Bardo because for years I also studied Buddhism. And Bardo is that sense of death, right? But it doesn't have to be the extreme death that I endured. Each and every one of us face Bardo in our life. We face Bardo when we get a divorce, or when we hear we have an illness, or anytime we feel like the rug is being pulled out underneath us, anytime we feel that sense of, oh, my life just changed, and it didn't change for the better, that sense of loss, that sense of death is Bardo. So we each experience it. And I think, collectively we're experiencing that right now for our country. But it's that sense of struggle, that sense of needing to rise above. And my hope is that people see this as a call for each and every one of us to really dig deep and be resilient and to maintain hope no matter the circumstances we're facing.
That's wonderful. Let's open it up to questions. Who might have a question? Just,
Yeah, well, I have a question, but first I want to thank you for everything you've taught me, which is immense. I want to thank you for not yelling at me every time I complained about how hard it is to write a book. I will never say that to you again. But I wanted to ask about your son. And obviously, he's a central character in the story. His birth precipitated all the events. He also provided the inspiration for you to heal. I'm curious if he's read it, what his reaction has been to all of this.
Samina, you want to repeat the question?
Yes, so I'm going to repeat it for everyone on Zoom. The question was, how is my son reacting to the book? My son lives in London, which is why he's not here. But I mailed him a couple copies of the book, and he just finished it. And so he's been kind of on edge the whole time. He's like, send me everything that, send me everything. I want to know everything, every interview you do, every little report that comes in. So I've been sending him everything. But one of the things that I told him, I hand wrote him a letter with the book when I mailed it. And I said, I do not want you to read this and feel sad. This is not about the difficulty of your birth. This is about the miracle that is us. So that's what I'm hoping he sees.
So first, Samina, it's great to be here. You talk about the distinction between who you were and who you are, and how that's a changeable story. But I'm curious about, what did you discover that was unchangeable? What about you persists even through such great change?
So the question is, what about me persists despite everything that has changed and been lost? That's a really good question. I have to write that in my next book. I think the things that persist is our core. I think, it's this, anyone who's a parent in here knows that there's always this argument about what is nurture and what is nature, right? And then you have these two, I've got my son and I have my daughter, and I know now having both of them, and they're so different, that a lot of it is nurture. And a lot of those things that are very much in the core, right? So I feel like a lot of the traits that I have, a lot of the bad traits, impatience, a lot of that stuff, I think that's just part of my personality and it doesn't change. I think that the things that did change for me were the recognition that, what I was talking about with the brain, the recognition that our thoughts are very malleable, the recognition that what we tell ourselves is really malleable. But that's a good question. The things about me that have stayed the same, I should ask my mom. My mom's, she would be the perfect person.
Next to her.
Yeah, next to her.
Maybe you have someone way in the back there. Maybe you could stand, yes.
So I have experienced medical trauma as well, and one curiosity I have is, how were you able to kind of release that anger that you feel towards medical teams, especially going through a second pregnancy as well as your entire life as a doctor? How are you able to release and move forward?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you release after a medical trauma, how do you release the pain, the anger for the medical team, and move forward? And I think it's an interesting question, because I think the process of healing in the West, I was born in India, so we have very different ideas in India about these things than we do in the West. And in the West, we just have this sense that healing should end at some point. Oh, it's been 2 years. Why are you still so upset? Oh, that happened 5 years ago and you're still talking about it? We have this idea, but I think that it's a journey that you just continue and continue and continue. I think the anger comes up, every once in a while, but you've got, I think for ourselves, and I hate to say that, but I think that at some point for ourselves, we have to give up that anger. We decided not to, sue the hospital. The doctor who delivered my son, actually, about a year later, we actually got a phone call from another mom who asked me if I would be part of her lawsuit, because they were actually creating a, what is the term? Class action. Thank you. A class action lawsuit against him, because he had done this same kind of stuff to other women, to other moms, where he just didn't take them seriously. And, and I again said no, because to me, it's like, I don't want to hold on to the anger. I don't want to continue to live in the trauma. I want to really rebuild. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer other than that it just takes, time, and to give yourself time.
Yeah, here, and then behind.
You spoke about how you had to relearn your motor skills, and in that same breath, reestablish the connections of love you had to family members or the people around you. What was it like navigating those relationships that were now new? And how did those relationships change in comparison to how they were previously, especially with your father, your mother?
So the question is, how did reconstructing the brain essentially changed my relationships to people around me. And what happens, I think, is that because when we're growing up, the brain starts being able to hold on to memories after the age of 5. Before the age of 5, you're told a lot of different things, and you've got photographs of yourself as little ones, but you don't really remember any of that. It's after the age of 5. And I think what happens is that because everything is in that, the early parts of your brain wiring, no matter how old you get, every time we go back to our parents' house, we revert. We're like, oh my God, I'm a 10-year-old again. And I'm like fighting with my mom. And I'm storming off to my room. And I'm 50. You're just like, what am I doing? That changes. Because now when I look back on my early memories, none of the emotion is there. I have memories that are episodic, so I see. But the overlay of emotions, which is what we do with our brain, we overlay emotion onto experiences. That part is no longer there.
Oh, interesting. There was someone here, yes.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to finding the shape of it after you wrote at that fever pitch for that time. What was it like to find the shape, and how did that work for you in the editing process?
I kept writing it, like I said, as linearly, because that was my background and I kept thinking I just have to tell this story in this way, and I think that I knew intuitively that it was wrong, and that's I didn't share it with anyone else because I knew it was wrong. There was no need to share my writing with someone when it's wrong. And it really was just a breakthrough, and it happened because one of the things that I advise my students to do, and one of the things that I do, is you have to find other means of creativity. So I went to a lot of different museums. I would see a lot of different exhibits and look at how artists are painting, their different subjects. And it was after one of those visits to the museum that I was walking home, and then I was like, oh my God, I get it. I understand what I have to do. I have to, kind of like the Pompidou, right? Where the structure of the building is on the outside. I was like, I've got to tear this structure down. And then the reason when you break open, I kept saying I broke the story. And so that's what it was. I broke the story and I scattered it like pieces, just like my brain. And then I had to take different parts and pull them back together. And then when you do that, though, I lost a lot. And then, interestingly enough, when I sold it, I think I sold it at about 75 or 80,000 words. And the reason I went with this editor is because she came back to me and she said, I have this vision for your book. I think we need to get rid of 20,000 words. And it was already a short book at that point. And she said, no, I think 20,000 words, we're going to streamline it. It's going to be a book that, someone picks up and they can just get through it. They can get through it immediately. And so we did. We had to take out another 20,000 words from it. But when it's just little chapters and pieces like that, it's so much easier to do it that way. But then she also saw something that was right in front of me that I didn't see, which she said is, you realize that you're talking about the importance of writing your novel, don't you? Mm-hmm. And I went, I am? And she said, yes. So we had to get rid of a lot of the other stuff that I had in the book. And then I had to bring forward the story of words, the importance of words, the importance of stories, whether they're stories I'm telling you, whether they're stories you tell yourself, or whether they're the stories we inherit, or they're the stories that are passed down century after century. So that's how all of the information in here, all of the different layers of words and stories and narratives. That's where that comes from.
Wonderful, wonderful to have the writer's journey. Okay, I guess we have time for just one more brief question.
You may have already said this, but I'm just curious. So, had you written your novel much prior to the when you had the medical trauma?
I had written a draft of the novel, and I actually had an agent. And so when I was finishing it during, the time when I was, my hope, was that, okay, I'm gonna, I've got 9 months before my son is born. I'm gonna finish this damn thing before my son is born. So that was my hope. But it was during the literal act of writing my book about the 7th month that I started to realize that my body, like everything, I had so much edema in my body that, I couldn't, my fingers were rubbing up against each other. And then at that point, everything stopped, because that's the first symptom that I noticed. And then later, when I decided I'm not giving this up, I'm going to write, I don't care what the doctor says. When I went back to the book, I read it and I didn't recognize it at all. It was like I had pulled a book off the shelf and started reading it. And I went, and it terrified me. And I deleted it because I was so scared. And I deleted it and I started all over again.
And that's the novel.
Right. This is
My Dross on a Rainy Day.
And that's the novel.
That's the novel in which, in this memoir, her neurologist is so surprised at Samina's recovery and said, how did you do it? And Samina said, it wasn't just me. I really can't take credit for it. He presses her. No, do tell us, how did you do this? And she said, I wrote a book. So thank you so much. Samina will be here signing books. You can come up, and personalized card is going to close us out.
Thank you. Can we give one more hand for Samina Ali? This is truly extraordinary. We're so glad to be a part of your book's journey. Thank you for sharing with all of us here, and also to our online people. Thank you, and beyond this store too. So thank you so kindly, Kathryn. Thank you for your expert moderation. Excellent question. I will be brief and let you know. Well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you all for being here and for celebrating Samina's book with us. We have books at the front register. You can find them there. Samina is going to be right here signing, and we can take a beat too. But you'll line up right this direction, right where I am right here is the front of the line. Books are at the front register. You can come back here and have them signed. Please make yourselves comfortable. There are other beverages. Your homework is to finish the open bottles that you have. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.